Do you want a garden where you can grow more in 80% less space with only 2% of the work and using only 10% of the water as a traditional single-row garden? Well, stick around. Today I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about gardening with raised beds. Come on, let's go. Hey, how you doing today? I'm Rick Bickling. Welcome to the How Do Gardener, where we give you expert gardening advice to help you plant successfully, grow organically, and live your best gardening life. You know, about 10 years ago, I was faced with a bit of a gardening dilemma. I really wanted to increase the size of our vegetable garden, but the only place in the yard that really received full sun that I hadn't planted in already was our basketball court in the backyard. Rather than look at it as a negative, I decided to get creative, and I began my courtyard garden project. Now, I knew the concrete would make an ideal surface for a gazebo and a greenhouse, two things I really had wanted to add to my garden for a long time. But I had to have a large garden. Gardening on concrete? Well, that's when I came across the book Square Foot Gardening, written by Mel Bartholomew. This technique allows anyone to grow a garden almost anywhere, no matter how much space you have or what kind of soil, if any, you may have. Rather than just trying to dig down into the existing soil, square foot gardening allows you to garden on top of whatever soil or surface you may have by adding your own soil mixture into raised beds placed on top of the ground. I had found my answer. Well, what are some of the benefits of gardening in raised beds versus just a plain old regular in-the-ground garden? The first way it benefits you over a traditional garden is soil compaction. In a traditional garden, you've got to walk in between the rows, in between the plants, in order to sow, water, fertilize, and harvest your crop. By using beds that are no wider than 4 feet, you can easily reach anywhere into your bed from either side. That way you'd never have to walk in your beds. The soil is never compacted. The raised beds keep the grass, weeds, and tree roots out. Since you're filling the beds with a custom quality soil mixture, you really don't have to worry about how good or bad or rocky the soil that you want to plant in is. Now, this soil ensures good drainage, and since you really only have to water in the bed itself, not the whole garden area and the pathways, you only use about 10% of the water you would in a traditional garden. Raised beds also warm up earlier in the season than the soil in the ground. Well, that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Now hold on a second, I know what you're thinking. Before you run out in the yard and just start building a bunch of raised beds everywhere, you really need to determine where you're going to put these raised beds, how many you have room for, and most importantly, how many you're willing to build, maintain, plant in, and harvest from. Remember, a small, well-tended garden or containers will produce more than a large garden that's weed-filled and untended. You don't need a degree in art or an expensive software program to draw a rough sketch of your landscape and garden plan. If you have the original survey from when you bought your house, make a copy of it and use it as a starting point. If not, just make a rough sketch of the footprint of your home or go into Google Earth, do a screenshot, and trace around that. What you want to do is draw in the existing landscape features, the planned garden areas, indicate which way is north, and make a note of any shady or poorly drained areas. Now, one of the first decisions you're going to have to make with raised beds is what material are you going to build them out of. Some of your choices are untreated lumber, typically Douglas fir, hardwood like oak, cedar like a fence outside, composite deck boards, which is what I use, metal, could be galvanized, could be just plain steel, brick with or without mortar, stone, again with or without mortar, concrete block, again with or without mortar, just some old logs stacked up. There's a lot of kits available. I've got links down below. And really on a smaller scale, you can just use some containers like a 5-gallon bucket, some big planters, as long as they have good drainage. To help you better determine which material you should use to build your beds out of, let's look at some of the factors you should consider. First is price. How much does it cost to purchase and assemble? Durability. How long will it last in the elements in constant contact with the soil? Safety. Is the material safe for use with soil in which food is grown? Ease of use. Effectiveness. Is the soil kept in and the weeds kept out? And finally, aesthetics. Do you like the way your beds look? Alright, well, let's take a look at how each of the potential materials you may want to use stacks up against these criteria. As they say, safety first. The two materials that I would recommend you never use are railroad ties and any kind of pressure-treated lumber. Railroad ties are treated with chemical preservatives such as creosote and chromated copper arsenate, Doesn't sound like something you want in your garden, does it? Both of these are harmful to humans and pets, and they're banned for residential use. Now, although the chemicals used in pressure-treated lumber are supposed to be safer than they used to be, for many years they contained arsenic, I personally would still avoid using this. If you've ever picked up a pressure-treated board at the store, you know it tends to be very moist. Whatever that stuff is, I don't want it leaching into my soil. There are plenty of other materials available. And in case you're wondering, composite deck boards are safe. They're made from a wood thermoplastic composite, which is certified for USDA organic use by the USDA. The next criteria we're going to look at is effectiveness. How well is each of these materials in a raised bed going to keep the soil in and weeds, grass, and roots out? And quite frankly, all of these materials will probably do a good job of that. With the exception of maybe logs that you might stack up and hook together, there may be some gaps in between the logs and you might lose some soil. The two main objective criteria that we're going to take a look at are price and durability, and there's a direct relationship between these two. In general, the more a material costs, the longer it's going to last. So let's break it down. The price of bricks, stone, and metal will vary greatly based on the exact material used and the method of construction. On the bright side, these materials will most likely last a lifetime. Alright, well, let's take a look at my top 4 choices for materials to use for a raised bed. First is untreated lumber. The cost is about 71 cents a linear foot. And to make a 4 foot by 4 foot bed that's 6 inches deep, that's about $11.36, not including the screws or some weed blocker fabric underneath. A raised garden bed made out of untreated lumber will last probably less than 5 years. The next option is cedar. That runs about $1.27 a linear foot. So again, for a 4 by 4 foot bed that's 6 inches deep, that's going to be about $20.32, again without the screws and weed blocker fabric. A raised bed made out of cedar will last about 10 years. The next choice is composite deck board. That's what I decided to go with. That runs about $1.75 a linear foot, so by a 4 foot by 4 foot bed that's 6 inches deep, it's about $28. Composite deck board is warranted for 25 years. And lastly, there's concrete block. That runs about $2.78 a linear foot, so to build a 4 foot by 4 foot bed, in this case 8 inches deep, without any mortar, just stacking the blocks together, that'll cost about $44.48. One of those beds will last you about 40 years. Okay, so now that you've picked what material you're going to build your raised beds out of, how do you build one of these things? Well, for our purposes, I'm going to assume you're going to pick some kind of a board type material, be it cedar, untreated lumber, or composite decking boards. Each bed is going to be 4 feet by 4 feet squared and basically 6 inches deep. Now, if you want to grow some root crops like potatoes or carrots, you'll need to make your beds 12 inches deep, and I'll show you how to do that later. So for a 4 by 4 foot bed, you need 4 pieces of lumber that are 4 feet long. Now, I suggest that you get your home center to cut your boards for you, because a 4 foot piece of lumber is easy to fit in almost any car. You don't need a big truck for it. Now, the 2 things you need to keep in mind when you're building this is you want to keep it square and stagger the corners as you're putting it together. Let me show you how that works. Take 2 of your boards, place them on edge, and butt one of them up against the long side of the other board. Now, through the long board, you're going to want to screw into the end of the second board, and I would use maybe 2 screws. Next, take the third board, place it up against this one. Now go on the other side and put 2 screws in that way. Finally, take the fourth board, place it right in there where it fits, and you want to screw into both sides of that as shown in this picture. Now again, this is not to scale, and this is kind of looking down on the boards. A good idea is maybe to pre-drill your holes. Now, once each bed is constructed, you're going to want to place it in an area that receives full sun. Check out the link to my video above that tells you what different levels of sunlight are and how to determine how much sun any area of your yard receives. Now, you can place 2 or more beds together to form a long row of beds, but remember to leave 3 feet between each row of beds. That's kind of the optimum distance to make it easy to walk in between your rows. Now, once you've got your beds kind of placed where you want them, if it's on grass, remove any existing grass within each bed and level each bed. Now you can staple a piece of weed blocker fabric to the bottom of each bed and place the bed in its final position. Now, if you're going to grow potatoes, carrots, beets, turnips, some kind of a root crop, you're going to want to have a 12-inch or 1 foot deep bed. The easiest way to do that is just to stack 2 6-inch beds on top of each other. Alright, so now that you've got your raised beds built, The next key component in square foot gardening is the soil. You're going to make your own custom mixture. This mixture, called Mel's Mix after Mel Bartholomew, the author of the book and the creator of square foot gardening, consists of 1/3 coarse vermiculite, 1/3 peat moss, and 1/3 compost. It's this soil that allows you to grow your vegetables in only 6-inch deep beds. Okay, so how much total soil and how much of each of these three components do you need for one square foot garden bed? Like we said, each bed is 4 feet long by 4 feet wide. So for a 6-inch deep bed, that's going to be a total of 8 cubic feet of soil. For each of your three materials, vermiculite, peat, moss, and compost, you're going to need 2 2/3 cubic feet of each. Now for a 12-inch or 1 foot deep bed, that's 16 cubic feet of soil. So again, breaking that down for each of your components, vermiculite, peat moss, and compost, now you're going to need 5 1/3 cubic feet of each one. And when you're at the store, the typical size of a bag of each of these is 2 cubic feet. The next key component you need for square foot gardening is to place a permanent 12-inch by 12-inch grid over each raised bed. The fully grown size of each plant determines how many can be grown in any given square. For example, in any given square, you may plant 1 tomato plant, 9 green beans, or 16 carrots. You can use strips of wood or string to make these grids. Now I chose to install drip irrigation lines to use as both my grid and to optimize the watering in the beds, and then I hooked my drip irrigation system to my rainwater harvesting system. Now many vegetables such as pole beans, peas, cantaloupe, and even tomatoes can be grown on a vertical trellis. Now make sure you check out the book All New Square Foot Gardening by Mel Bartholomew. Again, I've got a link down below. It'll give you detailed information on how much of each vegetable you can plant per square foot, and lots of other great information. And for some really good information on growing tomatoes, check out my video up here.